G'day guys, Dave Lee coming at you once again, and welcome to another edition of Behind the Disney Classics. In this video, we'll be taking a look at the making of the 22nd feature film in the Walt Disney Animation Classics canon. Based on the iconic literary works of British author A.A. Milne, it is the film that legendary Disney songwriter Richard M. Sherman would call Walt Disney's last great achievement. Released in 1977, it is of course The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. One may wonder how Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh can be considered Walt Disney's last great achievement, when Walt himself passed away 11 years prior to the movie's release. While The Jungle Book, released in 1967, may have been the final movie to have been overseen by Walt, Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh can be considered to be the final movie to have his personal involvement, and takes its roots back to the late 1930s. No, Many Adventures is not another example of a Disney feature caught in production hell for decades, but it is in fact a package feature, consisting of 3 previously released Disney Winnie the Pooh shorts strung together to create a feature-length film. Many Adventures compiles the 1966 short Winnie the Pooh and the Honey Tree, a personal project of Walt himself, its sequel 1968's Winnie the Pooh and the Blustery Day, a short conceived and approved by Walt, and 1974's Winnie the Pooh and Tigger 2, the Disney Animation Studio's love letter to Walt's previous 2 shorts and his grander ideas for a Pooh franchise. I have discussed previously in this series Walt's tenacity in sourcing stories to adapt into potential features following the success of his first feature-length animation Snow White in 1937. And while Disney classics like Cinderella, Peter Pan, Beauty and the Beast, and even The Little Mermaid are the most well-known classics to have spawned from this era, unbeknownst to some, the stories of A.A. Milne's lovable character Winnie the Pooh caught Walt's attention in this period too. A.A. Milne's Winnie the Pooh stories were published across 4 enormously successful books between 1924 and 1928. 2 children's verse books, When We Were Very Young and Now We Are 6, as well as 2 story collections, Winnie the Pooh and The House at Pooh Corner. The stories of Winnie the Pooh, his lovable animal friends and their owner Christopher Robin were based on Milne's own son, Christopher Robin Milne, and his real-life toys. The setting of the 100-acre wood took inspiration from the Ashdown Forest in East Sussex, England, where Milne owned a quiet cottage and in which Christopher Robin would play with his animal toys. These stories of childlike innocence quickly captured the imagination of children in Britain during the dark years following the First World War and became an instant cultural phenomenon. While it has been said that Winnie the Pooh wasn't well known in America prior to the Walt Disney shorts, it should be noticed that the first American edition of Winnie the Pooh had in fact sold 150,000 copies in its first year. So while Pooh may not have been the same phenomenon as it was in the UK, he was relatively well known stateside as well. In fact, the stories of Winnie the Pooh were popular enough that they wound up in the hands of the Disney family, with Walt's wife Lillian finding herself reading them to their 2 daughters before bedtime. Hearing his children laughing and enjoying the stories of an evening, Walt's interest and attention was grabbed. Throughout this series, we have also established Walt's persistence when it came to the properties that took his fancy. And in the case of Winnie the Pooh, Walt persisted for almost 3 decades to make his idea for an adaptation a reality. Walt made numerous attempts between 1928 and the early 1960s to gain the media rights to Milne's stories, corresponding directly with UK literary agent Curtis Brown. It was not until 1961, 5 years after Milne's passing, that Disney was able to secure the rights to the story from the Milne estate. In addition, he also secured US marketing rights from American media pioneer and proclaimed father of the licensing industry, Stephen Schlesinger. By 1964, story meetings had begun on Walt's Winnie the Pooh adaptation, and it wasn't soon before Walt decided that he no longer wanted to make it a feature-length production, but instead platform the property and section his original feature ideas into 3 separate 26-minute sections, which he could then release as pre-film supplements alongside theatrical features. In doing so, Walt believed that he could slowly familiarize the American audience with the characters and stories over time, similar to how and why he commissioned the release of the Lady and the Tramp novelization 2 years earlier than the respective movie. Richard M. Sherman would paraphrase Walt in a later interview saying, "Once we have people aware with the Winnie the Pooh characters, the next time around it'll be much bigger, and it'll become a classic. It'll become a masterpiece." Walt's grand plan, however, was to eventually make a Pooh feature, combining the 3 proposed shorts to create a feature-length production, using the first of which as the feature's prelude. And so, although slightly deterred and skeptical, the animation and production team began shaping what would become the first of a proposed series of Winnie the Pooh shorts, Winnie the Pooh and the Honey Tree. Going into Pooh, Walt wanted to stay true to the ideals, tones and spirit presented in Milne's books, as well as to the visual style of the original Ernest H. Shepard illustrations. This was certainly something he paid special attention to, following the backlash of his Alice in Wonderland adaptation in 1951 by British audiences and critics for being too Americanized and unfaithful to the original Lewis Carroll stories. However, being that this was now a Disney property, despite wanting something that felt like classic Pooh, that fans of the stories could connect with, he also wanted something that felt very Disney, that the fans of Disney features could connect with. Disney artist Ralph Wright, who would not only work on the film's animation but also provide the voice of Eeyore, would later go on to say that the adaptation problems were many. How to keep the original Milne style and still make it understandable to American audiences and not upset the British. Fully conscious of a further backlash that could ensue, Walt instructed animators to keep the characters visually similar to those in Shepard's illustrations. Though, after some trial and error, the animators concluded that Shepard's one-dimensional crosshatch etchings wouldn't translate very well to their three-dimensional animated space. A similar conclusion that they had also come to with Alice in Wonderland. The character designs became a little rounder and a little more flexible, and thus were able to be moved in different ways and shown in various different angles. At first, Walt was a little worried that the new designs would be more style than substance, but was eventually persuaded to sign off on the characterizations by the animators. In order to keep the substance of Shepard's original drawings, the animators decided to employ inking techniques on the backgrounds, which would give them a somewhat crosshatch feel. Using the same techniques used to style Lady and the Tramp, artists first painted backgrounds, then outlined the shapes with ink lines over the top. In a move that seems somewhat contradictory to his desire to keep the stories largely in line with Milne's books, Walt gave story and animation duties on Winnie the Pooh to animators who weren't fans of the books, despite there being a number of Pooh and Milne fans on his team. Walt did this as he feared that those who had an affinity to the books and characters would stay too true to the source and would not fall in line with his ideas to slightly Americanize the Pooh featurette, his way of Disney-fying the character and stories. Under the direction of Wolfgang Wooly Reitherman, the story team ultimately worked on smaller departures from the original stories. The team began to add more American-style humour, adding a number of visual gags that wouldn't seem too out of place in one of their Mickey, Donald or Goofy shorts. But perhaps two of the most controversial moves were to add a brand new American side character who would be a Native American animal, a gopher with a thick Southern American accent in an effort to add to the short's humour, as well as the decision to cast an American child, Bruce Reitherman, son of Wooly, as the voice of Christopher Robin. In a further effort to make Pooh feel a little more recognisable as a Disney production, in a time where the studio had long developed a recognisable style, Walt hired the studio's famed songwriters Robert and Richard Sherman, who had provided iconic songs for 1964's Mary Poppins and the then upcoming The Jungle Book, released in 1967, to write new songs for the featurette. Disney legend Sterling Holloway, who lent his voice to a number of Disney features and shorts, including Dumbo, Bambi, Alice in Wonderland and The Jungle Book, was also hired to provide the voice of Pooh. Walt not only wanted the movie to look and feel Disney, but wanted it to sound Disney as well. When the short was eventually released alongside the 1966 live-action feature The Ugly Dachshund, Walt's fears came to light, as British critics weren't too favourable with the short. One critic from the Mail described the short and its Americanizations as an extraordinary attack on one of the last proud remnants of the British Empire, and E.H. Shepard himself supposedly called the short a complete travesty. Critics also complained that Disney had found space in the movie for a gopher, but couldn't work in Piglet or Tigger, two of the most iconic characters in Milne's books. One critic even campaigned against Disney to redub Christopher Robin with a British accent, comparing the studio's move to giving American literary icon Johnny Appleseed a British accent. After a lengthy crusade, the studio eventually recalled the film from Britain and did in fact redub the voice for future re-releases, including The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. Despite ruffling a few feathers in the UK, Winnie the Pooh and the Honey Tree was a hit with American audiences, and shortly before his death in the same year, Walt approved the second feature for production. As he obviously didn't get to oversee it through to the end, the second featurette, 1968's Winnie the Pooh and the Blustery Day, became the studio's first production to be produced without Walt. For Blustery Day, Wally Reitherman took the reins as not only director but also overseer of the project. Reitherman brought more experienced and more well-renowned animators onto the project, such as Frank Thomas, Ollie Johnson and Milt Kahl, and made the decision to make the movie a lot more faithful to the books. This time round, casting British child John Walmsley as Christopher Robin, and finally introducing Piglet and Tigger into the mix, demoting Gopher to a short cameo only. The production of Blustery Day hasn't been as well documented as that of Honey Tree, but on release in 1968, alongside live-action feature The Horse in the Grey Flannel Suit, the short was an incredible success, and cemented Winnie the Pooh as a Disney character, allowing the stories to become synonymous with and iconic of the Disney brand. Due to being more faithful to the source material, the movie was also more well received by the British audience. The short was so successful in fact that it would go on to win that year's Academy Award for Best Animated Short Film. The third short, Winnie the Pooh and Tigger 2, wouldn't be released for another 7 years, where it was released alongside live-action feature The Island at the Top of the World in 1974. And as with many features produced outside of Walt's life, even less documentation has been given to this particular short. This short was also well received, and though nominated for another Academy Award, ultimately lost to Bob Gardner and Will Vinton's Closed Mondays. Both Blustery Day and Tigger 2 would employ new songs from the Sherman Brothers and feature Sterling Holloway as the voice of Pooh. Well-known American comedian and voice artist Paul Winchell was chosen to develop the iconic voice of Tigger for both shorts too. Soon after the release of Tigger 2, the studio began putting plans into motion to finally achieve Walt's ultimate 40-year-old goal for the Pooh shorts, by stitching them together to create a feature-length anthology film. The Disney studio was no stranger to anthology or package features, releasing a number of them in the 1940s. These consisted of a selection of existing animated shorts created when feature animation was all but halted during World War II. Released in 1977, The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh became the studio's 8th and final package feature, though these days it's more well considered as a Disney classic. In order to create a feature-length narrative for the movie, the story team decided to present the 3 existing shorts in full, and link them with newly animated sequences, framing the shorts as chapters within a greater Pooh story. This was an incredibly ingenious idea, which organically flowed and borrowed from the style of the original shorts, which had featured the animations interacting with the text within the pages of a book, almost as if the filmmakers had planned on these framing devices all along as a way to future-proof their eventual feature film. In addition to the small animated links, a 2.5-minute postscript was also added to the feature. This was an adaptation of the final chapter from The House at Pooh Corner, which sees Pooh and Christopher Robin saying their final goodbyes as Robin bids farewell to his childhood. It is said that the story team had wanted to develop this segment all along, but always felt that it would make the individual shorts seem too finite and closed off, instead opting to leave it for the ending of the ultimate feature. While Milne's original stories and Shepard's original illustrations are still part of the social literary conscience known as icons of British literature, there's no denying that the characters of Pooh, Tigger, Piglet and Christopher Robin have entered the pop culture zeitgeist, synonymous with their Disney adaptations. The Pooh shorts, especially Blustery Day, and the final feature film, Many Adventures, went on to create one of Disney's largest individual franchises next to only Mickey Mouse. Since the release of Many Adventures in 1977, Disney have released a plethora of Pooh properties. An educational short, Winnie the Pooh Discovers the Seasons, was released in 1981, and a 4th theatrical short was released in 1983 alongside The Sword in the Stone. However, for this short, the animation was outsourced and not produced at the Disney studio. The classic 50-episode animated series, The New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, ran between 1988 and 1991, and also spun off into a series of holiday specials. There was also the computer animated My Friends Tigger and Pooh, which ran between 2007 and 2010, and alongside them 2 live-action puppetry series, Welcome to Pooh Corner and The Book of Pooh, which debuted in 1983 and 2001 respectively. Pooh and friends have also been the stars of 12 animated Disney-tuned theatrical and direct-to-video feature movies. Most notably, these include Pooh's Grand Adventure, The Search for Christopher Robin in 1997, the Tigger movie in 2000, and Piglet's Big Movie in 2003. Additionally, the studio attempted an animation reboot for the Pooh franchise in 2011, Winnie the Pooh, which aside from many adventures, is the only Pooh feature considered a part of the Walt Disney Animation Classics canon, and also the canon's final traditionally animated feature so far. In 2018, the characters made their first proper leap into a live-action feature in the wonderfully charming film Christopher Robin, starring Ewan McGregor as a middle-aged Christopher Robin and Pooh and friends as computer-animated stuffed toys. Not only another attempt to reboot the decades-old franchise for a modern audience, but a beautiful love letter and spiritual sequel to the original animated shorts. For me personally, like many others around the world, Winnie the Pooh is a character who I've had a connection with since childhood. I grew up not only watching Disney's features and television series, but also with A.A. Milne's stories, which were read to me as a young child. What more is there to say about Winnie the Pooh other than what's already been said about him a million times over? He is a rare character that not only represents the greatest things about childhood, imagination, friendship, and happiness, but is also a character that sticks with you into adulthood as a lifelong best friend. These are things that Walt Disney and his team of storymen and animators managed to stay true to throughout their shorts and ensuing franchise. Where Walt's Alice in Wonderland is a completely different beast to Carol's original stories, Pooh very much still retains that wonder and beauty of Milne's works. Despite a few Americanizations and Disneyfications, many adventures of Winnie the Pooh remains beautifully and respectfully in style with Milne's works and presents them with such elegance and class. While Pooh may have gone on to become one of Disney's more toddler-aimed brands in later years, the impact of many adventures should never be downplayed. The movie remains a gorgeous feature, full of love, joy, and companionship, and a welcome entry in the Disney Animation Classics canon, one which doesn't feel out of place with any of the other features. As a labour of love from Walt Disney and his team, The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh is also easily one of the most charming, most wonderful, most enduring, and most splendiferous features Disney have ever produced, and one of their most dynamic and ingenious pieces of animation. It's a film that has meant a great deal to me for most of my life, and provided me with one of my oldest, lifelong best friends. Now, sorry to be a bother, but who stole my honey? Thank you for joining me for another edition of Behind the Disney Classics. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the like button down below, and if you'd like to join me for future installments, hit subscribe. While you're at it, don't forget to check out my past editions in the Behind the Disney Classics series. I hope I'll see you again soon, guys. Take care, and have a magical day.